Salvete. Welcome to the fourth video in our series on the pronunciation of classical Latin. In this video, we're going to talk about consonant sounds. In most cases, the pronunciation of consonants in classical Latin is really not that different than it is in modern English. So in this video, we're going to focus on those places where it's really different. We'll start with the letters C and G. They're always hard in classical Latin. We have no distinction between hard and soft sounds of the letters like we do in modern English or in ecclesiastical Latin. C, for instance, is always pronounced like the letter K. This fellow, whom we call Cicero in modern English or Cicero in ecclesiastical Latin, is called Cicero in classical Latin. Cicero. The letter G is always pronounced hard as it is in the English word gap. So this Latin word, which means I bear or I wear, is pronounced gero. So this is paraffin wax. It's used for making candles. The Latin word for wax is cera, C-E-R-A. So if I want to say I'm bearing wax, I'm carrying wax, I would say ceram gero. Notice with a hard C and a hard G. Speaking of the K sound, the Latin alphabet does also include the letter K, but it's very rarely used. Normally only in the word calendae, which is the name for the first day of the month. We see it in our modern word calendar. The proper name Kaiso was also spelled with the letter K. And occasionally, instead of the more usual letter C, is the first letter in the word Carthago, the Latin name for the city of Carthage. We also have the letter Q in Latin. As in English, it's always followed by a U and is pronounced in pretty much the same way as it is in the English word queen. And so the Latin word for who is pronounced quis. Speaking of the letter U, you may recall from an earlier lesson that U and V were originally the same letter, and you can still see them used interchangeably in some texts and inscriptions. You can hear this connection in classical Latin, where the V sound always sounds like our W. The Latin word for victory, for instance, is pronounced victoria. The letter U also sometimes has this W sound after the letter S, as in the Latin word persuadeo. As you might have guessed, this word means persuade. The letter R is trilled or rolled in Latin as it is in Latin's modern descendants, such as Italian and Spanish. All right, let me try to roll an R. Roll. The name for Rome, then, should really sound like Roma. There are also certain combinations of consonants that have a distinct pronunciation in classical Latin. X and Z, for instance, are actually double consonants which the Romans took from the Greek language. They represent another consonant sound plus the sound S. X is a combination of C or G and S, so both of those sounds should be present when we pronounce the Latin X. This word, which means leader, is pronounced dux. The word for king is rex. Z is really a combination of D and S, and is always pronounced like DZ. For instance, the word which means belt is pronounced zona. Z is only used in words that Latin has borrowed from Greek, which in Greek are spelled with the Greek letter zeta. The same is generally true of the combinations PH, CH, and TH. In these combinations, the H represents a sound known as a rough breathing in Greek. What that means for us when we're pronouncing classical Latin is that we're going to have both of the sounds in one of those double consonants. In the Latin word for philosophy, for instance, philosophia, we hear both the P and the H. Again, philosophia. As for the combination CH, remember that C itself sounds like a K in Latin. It should sound like a K and an H together. For example, the word for chorus, which comes from the ancient Greek word choros, chorus. The same goes for the Latin word athleta, from which we get our word athlete. It comes originally from the Greek word athletes. One last thing. It seems that the ancient Romans, when they had a word with GN in it, would also put an N sound in front of the G. So the word for big would be pronounced magnus. Okay, so there are at least the basic differences in pronunciation between modern English and classical Latin. And remember, for more information, for more detail, you can download the chart that I have on my website, iternalatina.com, and you can send me a message if you have more questions. I'll be happy to answer your questions. Thank you for joining us. Valete.